Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into a candlelit ballroom where the air smells like beeswax, crushed flowers, and nervous anticipation, and you're standing perfectly still while layers of silk whisper against your legs. Somewhere behind you, an orchestra tunes its strings, and you already know this night isn't really about dancing at all. It's about being seen without being noticed, about wearing the right thing so precisely that no one remembers what you wore, only that you looked right. You probably won't survive this emotionally if you hate arbitrary rules, because every inch of fabric on your body has already been judged before you even arrive. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there right now. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand at the edge of the room, shoulders back, chin lifted just enough to suggest confidence, but not enough to imply pride, because pride, like a hemline too high, is always noticed. The dress you're wearing isn't simply clothing, it's a declaration, a test, a kind of social contract stitched together with silk thread and anxiety. Historically, debutante dresses were most often white, a mainstream fact that's repeated so often it sounds almost boring, but white was never just white. It was cream, ivory, eggshell, milk glass, each shade silently communicating something about your family, your age, your supposed innocence. Historians still argue whether the obsession with white was more about purity or about proving a family could afford a gown that would be ruined after one night. Either way, you feel it now, the pressure of a color that shows every flaw, every wrinkle, every accidental brush against the wrong elbow. The bodice fits you so precisely it's almost suspicious, like it knows secrets about your posture that you don't. This isn't comfort wear, this is compliance wear. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, a debutante's dress was often custom-made, measured repeatedly, adjusted obsessively, because a poor fit didn't just look bad, it suggested moral and social negligence. A quirky tidbit whispered among dressmakers was that some mothers insisted on fitting sessions at dawn, believing a girl's true shape appeared before breakfast, which sounds less scientific and more like a curse, but it tells you how seriously this was taken. You breathe shallowly, partly because the corsetry allows nothing else, and partly because you're aware that breathing too deeply might wrinkle something important. Around you, other girls stand in similar stillness, a quiet army of identical silhouettes differentiated only by microscopic details. The cut of a sleeve, the placement of a bow, the texture of lace. You begin to understand that the first rule of the debutante dress code is invisibility through perfection. Stand out too much, and you're vulgar. Blend in too much, and you're forgettable. It's like social camouflage, but everyone is dressed as a swan. There's a light joke somewhere here about this being the original dress code from hell, but you'd never dare say it out loud because humor, like fashion, must be deployed sparingly and only by those with established rank. You glance down at your gloves, pristine and pale, reaching just past the elbow, and you resist the urge to tug at them. Gloves were non-negotiable for formal presentations, a mainstream historical fact that signaled modesty and class, but also functioned as a kind of social barrier. Bare hands were intimate, gloves were armor. There's a fringe story, still debated, about a debutante in Edwardian London who removed one glove too early during her presentation and was quietly excluded from invitations for years afterward. Historians still argue whether this was punishment or coincidence, but the story survived because it felt true. You keep your gloves on, obviously. The room hums with low conversation, but none of it is meant for you. Not yet. Tonight you are an object being introduced, not a person speaking. The dress enforces that. Its weight reminds you to move slowly, deliberately. Quick gestures look sloppy. Sloppy gestures suggest poor upbringing. Somewhere deep in the lining of your gown is the unspoken rule that nothing about you should seem accidental. Even your innocence must look practiced. You shift your weight carefully, shoes protesting in a way that feels personal. Debutante shoes were often made of delicate materials like satin or kid leather, designed for appearance rather than endurance, which is a polite historical way of saying they hurt. A quirky tidbit passed down through letters and diaries mentions girls practicing standing for hours at home, books balanced on their heads, just to prepare for the physical demand of being still. It's almost funny in a bleak way that so much training went into not doing anything at all. You tell yourself this is character building. You immediately regret that thought. Your mother or aunt or some carefully chosen female guardian stands nearby, pretending not to watch you while watching you constantly. She knows the rules because she survived them, or maybe she didn't, and that's why she's nervous. Historians still argue whether debutante culture was more about controlling young women or reassuring anxious families that tradition still worked, but standing here, wrapped in rules and fabric, you suspect the answer is both. You adjust your shoulders again, remembering the fitting instructions, remembering the tailor's voice telling you posture is part of the dress. Slouching would collapse the illusion, like bad lighting in a theatre. The music swells slightly, a signal more than a sound, and you feel the moment approaching. This is where first impressions crystallize. The dress must announce you without speaking. Its simplicity must suggest refinement, but its expense must be legible to those trained to see it. There's a light joke to be made about this being the most expensive way to say nothing, but again, not out loud. You smooth the front of your skirt, fingers gliding over fabric chosen months ago, approved by committees of relatives and unspoken expectations. As you wait, you realize the dress is already doing its work. It has narrowed your movements, shaped your posture, quieted your voice. It has turned you into an idea of yourself that society finds acceptable. And this is only the beginning. The rules you followed so carefully tonight will multiply, subdivide, contradict themselves, and test you in ways you can't yet imagine. For now, though, you stand still, breathe shallowly, and let the silk speak on your behalf. You remain where you are as the room subtly rearranges itself around you, because nothing in a debutante ballroom ever truly stands still except the girls being judged. The rules you're about to learn aren't handed to you on paper. They drift through the air in glances, raised eyebrows, and the faintest tightening of smiles. Officially, there are dress codes: white gown, long gloves, hair up, minimal jewelry. Unofficially, there are hundreds more, and these are the ones that will ruin you if you miss them. Historians still argue whether these unwritten rules were more powerful than the written ones, but everyone who lived through them seemed to agree on one thing. You learned them too late. You feel the weight of those invisible rules settling onto your shoulders along with the fabric. The neckline of your dress is modest but not severe. That balance matters. Too high and you look childish, like you're playing dress-up in your mother's world. Too low and you look like you misunderstood the assignment entirely, which is society code for "we'll remember this forever." A mainstream historical fact is that debutante necklines were often regulated by hostesses or social committees, sometimes even measured, which sounds absurd until you realize how seriously this hierarchy took visual signals. Your collarbone is allowed to exist. It is not allowed to announce itself. You catch sight of another girl across the room. Her dress almost identical to yours, except for a barely perceptible difference in fabric sheen. That's the game. Satin versus silk. Machine lace versus hand-worked. A quirky tidbit passed through fashion historians' notes that experienced matrons could identify a girl's dressmaker from across a ballroom, like sommeliers sniffing out a vintage. You don't know if that's entirely true, but you believe it now because you can feel eyes doing exactly that to you. Evaluating, comparing, ranking. The official rules are the ones mothers like to recite, the ones that sound reasonable. White symbolizes purity. Gloves show modesty. Simple lines reflect good taste. The whispered rules are less kind. Don't outshine the host's daughters. Don't look wealthier than families ranked above you. Don't look poorer than families ranked below you either, which is a neat trick considering you're wearing the same color as everyone else. Historians still argue whether this constant balancing act was intentional cruelty or just the byproduct of a rigid social structure, but either way, you're living inside it now, trying to calibrate yourself in real time. Your dress's simplicity suddenly feels strategic. You remember the advice given during fittings. Let them notice you, not the gown. It sounds empowering until you realize it means the gown must be flawless enough to disappear. There's a light joke in your head about how this is the most expensive invisibility cloak ever made, and you almost smile, then stop yourself. Smiling too much looks eager, not smiling enough looks cold. You settle on neutral serenity, which your face now performs like a trained actor. A hostess glides past, her eyes flicking over you in a fraction of a second, and you feel assessed, approved maybe, or filed away for later judgment. The fringe stories are the ones that haunt you. A girl in New York who wore an off-white gown considered too ivory for her age, sparking whispers that lasted an entire season. Another in Paris whose sleeves were deemed provincial, marking her as charming but forgettable. Whether all these stories are true doesn't really matter. Historians still argue whether social ruin from dress code violations was as common as memoirs suggest, but fear doesn't require statistics. It just requires precedent. You adjust your stance again, remembering that posture itself is part of the dress code. Slouched shoulders suggest laziness. Rigid stiffness suggests insecurity. The ideal posture is relaxed discipline, which sounds like a contradiction because it is. You imagine the women before you, decades earlier, standing in similar rooms, wearing similarly restrictive gowns, all told the same thing. If you get this right, doors will open. If you get it wrong, they won't slam shut. They'll simply never open in the first place. There's something almost clever about how the rules contradict each other. Be modest, but appealing. Be simple, but memorable. Follow tradition, but don't look dated. A quirky tidbit from etiquette manuals of the early 20th century advised debutantes to appear unaware of their own elegance, which is possibly the most exhausting instruction ever written. You try to embody that now, pretending you didn't think about this dress for months, pretending it just happened to fall perfectly, pretending you woke up like this, historically speaking. The orchestra shifts into a more deliberate rhythm, and you feel the social machinery warming up. Soon, names will be announced and the rules will tighten even further. Once you step forward, every detail will be locked in memory. That's the unspoken truth behind all of this. The debutante dress code exists because memory is cruel. People will forget your conversation. They will forget your dance steps. They will not forget how you looked when you were first presented to the world. You glance once more at your reflection in a mirrored column, careful not to look vain. The girl looking back at you seems composed, appropriate, correct. That's the goal. Not beautiful, not striking, correct. The whispered rules have done their work, shaping you just as surely as the corset beneath the silk. And as you wait for your turn, you understand that from this moment on, Every dress you wear will be compared to this one, and every choice will be measured against the night you learn that the most dangerous rules are the ones no one ever writes down. You step forward when your name is called, and the light catches your dress in a way that feels almost accusatory, as if the color itself is asking to be interpreted. White, yes, but what kind of white? This is where the trouble begins. White isn't neutral here. It's a language with dialects, and you are suddenly very aware that you might be speaking with the wrong accent. A mainstream historical fact is that debutante gowns were traditionally white to signal youth and unmarried status. But that explanation is far too tidy for what actually happened in these rooms. White could flatter, condemn, or quietly humiliate, depending on how it was deployed. You notice the shade now more intensely than ever. It's not stark, not bridal, not aggressively bright. It's soft, warm, carefully chosen to suit your complexion, and more importantly, your position. A dress too bright suggested arrogance or an attempt to dominate the room. A dress too dull suggested either mourning or economy, neither of which you want whispered about you tonight. There's a quirky tidbit tucked into fashion archives about certain families sending fabric swatches to trusted friends in advance, asking for opinions under different lighting conditions because ballroom chandeliers could turn innocence into spectacle with one bad reflection. You imagine someone holding your fabric up to a window weeks ago, squinting, deciding your fate. As you move, you feel how the fabric responds. Heavier silks move with authority. Lighter ones flutter, which can read as charming or frivolous, depending on who's watching. Historians still argue whether fabric weight was consciously used as social signaling or simply followed fashion trends, but women of the time wrote about it as if it mattered deeply. You believe them. Right now, the way your skirt sways feels like a message you didn't get to edit. The color white also carries timing. Wearing it too young looks premature, like ambition disguised as tradition. Wearing it too late looks desperate, like you're clinging to a role society is ready to reassign. That's the cruel paradox. The dress is meant to mark your arrival, but it also starts a countdown. A fringe detail from etiquette guides notes that some debutantes reused their gowns for charity events later in the season, carefully altering them so they no longer read as presentation white, a kind of sartorial aging process that feels both practical and symbolic. Tonight, though, your dress is new, untouched, and very much under surveillance. You become aware of how easily white betrays you. A crease shows, a shadow forms, a bead of nervous sweat threatens to leave evidence. This is not a forgiving color. That, historians still argue, may have been the point. White demanded self-control. It rewarded stillness. It punished movement. You remember someone joking during a fitting that white dresses are snitches, and you almost laugh now because it's painfully accurate. Every flaw is visible, every mistake permanent, at least in memory. You pass close to another girl, and for a moment you compare. Her white is cooler, sharper. Yours is softer. Neither is wrong exactly, but they tell different stories. Hers suggests formality, discipline, perhaps a family confident enough to risk severity. Yours suggests approachability, warmth, perhaps a family invested in charm. Or maybe you're overthinking, which is also part of the dress code. Think constantly, appear effortless. There's a light joke bubbling up about how exhausting it is to look like you're not trying, but again, you keep it internal. Internal humor is the safest kind here. The symbolism of white extends beyond fabric. It frames your face, reflects light upward, softens features. This is why hair, makeup, and jewelry must be restrained, or the whole illusion collapses. A mainstream fact often overlooked is that debutante makeup, when allowed at all, was minimal to the point of invisibility. Rouge too bright could shock. Lip color too dark could scandalize. A quirky tidbit from early 20th century diaries mentions girls practicing looking fresh without looking painted, which sounds impossible because it mostly was. You feel your own face now, carefully prepared to look like it hasn't been prepared. Historians still argue whether the emphasis on white truly represented purity or whether it functioned as a visual reset, erasing individuality so families could project their own narratives onto you. Standing here, bathed in pale light, you suspect the latter. The dress turns you into a canvas. People will decide what they see, and their interpretations will stick longer than the night itself. You reach the end of your short walk and pause exactly as instructed. The dress settles around you, obedient, composed. You feel relief and tension in equal measure. The white has not betrayed you, not yet. But you also understand now that every future appearance will be measured against this moment. Once you've worn white like this, society expects a progression: color, embellishment, maturity. Deviate too sharply and whispers, "Start again." As you step back into the line, the chandeliers humming softly overhead, you realize the most dangerous thing about white isn't that it shows everything, it's that it remembers everything, and long after the fabric is stored away, yellowing quietly in a box, the image of you in it will remain preserved in collective memory, waiting to be compared to whoever you become next. Your hands are the next thing you become painfully aware of, because they are no longer quite yours. They belong to the gloves now. Long, pale, impossibly smooth, they turn even the smallest movement into something deliberate. Fingers bend more slowly. Gestures soften. You can't fidget without announcing it to everyone in the room. Gloves, a mainstream historical requirement for debutantes, were meant to signal refinement and modesty, but they also functioned as behavioral training. Bare skin invites impulse. Gloves demand restraint. You feel the seam running along the inside of your arm, perfectly straight, perfectly aligned, because even the seam matters. A crooked seam suggests haste. Haste suggests nerves. Nerves suggest weakness. The logic spirals quickly here. You remember being told not to remove your gloves under any circumstances unless explicitly invited to do so, and even then, only partially, only briefly. There's a quirky tidbit buried in etiquette manuals warning young women never to eat while fully gloved, not because it was rude, but because stained gloves were social evidence of clumsiness. You can already imagine the horror of grape juice on white kid leather. Social death by refreshment table. The gloves change how people look at you. A handshake becomes ceremonial. A touch on the arm becomes noteworthy. Gloves are permission and barrier at once. Historians still argue whether gloves were about hygiene, hierarchy, or moral symbolism, but standing here, you understand their true power is control. They dictate how close anyone can get, how familiar an interaction may become. You are approachable, but not touchable. It's a fascinating contradiction, and an exhausting one to maintain. You watch a girl the few places down the line adjust her glove ever so slightly, tugging it higher up her arm. The movement is subtle, but it draws a sharp look from her chaperone. That's how tight the margins are. Gloves must fit perfectly, not too loose, not too tight. A glove slipping down suggests carelessness. A glove stretched too taut suggests vanity or discomfort, neither of which is flattering. There's a light joke here about gloves being the original wearable anxiety devices, but again, you keep your face serene. The material matters too. Kid leather was prized for its softness and fit, while silk gloves were considered acceptable but less prestigious. A fringe detail from fashion historians notes that some families imported gloves from specific European makers believing the cut alone could elevate a girl's perceived standing. Whether that actually worked is still debated. Historians still argue whether observers truly noticed such distinctions or whether families simply wanted to believe they did. Right now, you don't care. You just want your gloves to behave. You become aware of how gloves limit sensation. When someone brushes past you, you feel it dimly, like a memory rather than a touch. This distance is intentional. Gloves keep you slightly removed from the physical world, reinforcing the idea that tonight is symbolic, not real. You are being presented, not participating. Even your hands are on display, framed, neutralized. Nails are short, pale, unremarkable. Anything else would draw the wrong kind of attention. At some point, someone will ask you to dance and you'll offer your gloved hand, palm down, fingers relaxed. Too firm a grip suggests eagerness, too limp suggests disinterest. The glove mediates all of this, smoothing out errors but also magnifying them. A sweaty palm can't hide here. A trembling hand is immediately obvious. You remind yourself to breathe because gloves don't hide nerves, they spotlight them. You recall a story, half legend, half warning, about a debutante who removed both gloves during a supper break, only to be seen by the wrong person at the wrong moment. Invitations dwindled, conversations cooled. Whether the gloves were the cause or just a convenient excuse is something historians still argue about. But the lesson survived intact. Gloves are not accessories. They are rules made visible. As the evening progresses, your arms begin to ache slightly, a dull reminder that elegance often requires endurance. The gloves don't stretch. They don't forgive. They simply insist. You realize that by the end of the night your hands will feel older than the rest of you, as if they've carried the full weight of expectation alone. And yet, there is something oddly comforting about them. They give you something to think about besides the eyes on you. They give you boundaries you can trust. As long as the gloves stay on, you are doing at least one thing right. In a room full of invisible rules, that small certainty feels almost luxurious. Your attention drifts downward now, inevitably, to the hem of your skirt, because the hemline is where innocence and scandal negotiate their fragile truce. You're acutely aware of how much fabric surrounds your legs, how it pools just enough to look intentional without becoming cumbersome. This is not accidental. A mainstream historical fact is that debutante hemlines were carefully regulated, often required to brush the floor without dragging because length communicated seriousness. Too short, and you looked fast. Too long, and you looked theatrical or outdated. Inches mattered here more than intentions. As you shift your weight, the skirt moves with you, obedient but watchful. It reveals nothing, yet somehow says plenty. You remember the fitting sessions where the hem was pinned and repinned, adjusted by fractions while adults debated your future like it was a curtain length. A quirky tidbit from fashion archives mentions that some seamstresses marked hems with coloured thread during fittings to track micro-adjustments, which feels absurd until you realise how much social meaning those adjustments carried. You are walking evidence of someone else's measuring tape. You notice how carefully everyone avoids stepping on anyone else's hem. It's a small courtesy loaded with significance. Stepping on a hem suggests clumsiness, intrusion, a lack of awareness. Having your hem stepped on is worse. It means you weren't paying attention, weren't guarding your own space. Historians still argue whether these anxieties were consciously enforced or simply absorbed through repetition, but the effect is the same. You move like someone protecting something fragile because you are. The hemline also controls your stride. Long skirts demand shorter steps, slower pacing. You cannot rush without looking ridiculous. This is part of the design. A dress that forces you to move slowly encourages contemplation, or at least the appearance of it. There's a light joke in your head about how this is the original speed limiter, but again, internal humour only. Outwardly, you glide because gliding is what's expected. You pass near a cluster of older women, their eyes dipping briefly to the floor, assessing. They're checking length, break, movement. They're asking silent questions. Is it even? Does it skim or drag? Does it reveal a shoe at the wrong moment? A fringe anecdote survives about a debutante whose hem was deemed a half-inch too short, sparking whispers that she was being pushed forward too aggressively by her family. Historians still argue whether the hem caused the gossip or merely gave it an excuse, but the story lingers because it feels plausible. You're grateful for every inch of fabric right now. The danger of the hemline isn't just how it looks standing still, it's how it behaves in motion. When you sit, does it rise too much? When you turn, does it flare unexpectedly? When you dance, does it reveal an ankle for too long? Ankles, famously, have caused more historical distress than they deserve. A mainstream fact worth noting is that even into the early 20th century, glimpses of ankle could still be considered daring in certain circles, especially for unmarried women. You monitor your movements instinctively, pulling the skirt into place before sitting, smoothing it as you stand. Shoes complicate everything. The hem must be long enough to conceal them most of the time, but not so long that you trip. Shoes that peek out too often suggest either impatience or poor tailoring. A quirky tidbit from personal letters mentions girls practicing walking at home while wearing their presentation shoes and skirts, navigating stairs and carpets like obstacle courses. You can relate. The memory of rehearsals flickers through your mind as you take another careful step. There's also the issue of symmetry. An uneven hem suggests haste or inattention, both social crimes. You imagine the seamstress's hands, the hours spent ensuring balance, the quiet prayer that the fabric wouldn't shift once worn. Historians still argue whether guests consciously noticed such details or whether they simply sensed when something was off. But either way, the pressure was real. Tonight your hem behaves. You silently thank everyone involved. As the evening progresses, you feel the subtle fatigue of managing so much fabric. Your calves ache from controlled steps. Your knees protest slightly when you sit and stand. This, too, is part of the test. Endurance masquerading as elegance. There's a light joke about how no one ever warned you. Debutante season was a lower body workout. But again, you keep your composure. Complaints, like wrinkles, are meant to be invisible. You watch another girl misjudge a step, her hem catching briefly on the edge of a carpet. It's minor. She recovers instantly, but you see the flicker of attention, the micro-shift in energy. Nothing dramatic happens. No one gasps. And yet the moment exists now, filed away in someone's memory. This is how it works. Not with explosions, but with accumulations. The hemline is also about boundaries. It creates physical space around you, a moving perimeter. People keep their distance, instinctively navigating the architecture of skirts and expectations. You are both present and untouchable, grounded and constrained. Historians still argue whether such clothing empowered women by commanding space or limited them by restricting movement. Standing here, managing every step, you suspect it did both, unevenly. By the time you pause again near the edge of the room, you've internalized the lesson. The hem is not the end of the dress. It's the beginning of judgment. It measures how you move through the world, how you manage obstacles, how you recover from near mistakes. And as long as it remains even, untroubled, and perfectly forgettable, you are safe. For tonight, at least. The weight at your throat and ears makes itself known next, a gentle reminder that even what you add to the dress can undo it entirely. Jewelry here is never just decoration, it's biography. It tells the room where you come from, how much your family has, and whether they understand the difference between confidence and desperation. A mainstream historical fact is that debutantes were traditionally discouraged from wearing diamonds, which were associated with married women, anniversaries, and established status. Pearls were safer, gold was cautious, nothing was ever accidental. You feel the necklace resting against your collarbone, light enough not to announce itself, visible enough to seem intentional. This balance was drilled into you during preparation. Too much sparkle suggests trying too hard, too little suggests either poverty or rebellion, and neither reads well on a first impression. A quirky tidbit passed down through fashion historians notes that some families borrowed jewelry for the occasion, carefully selecting pieces that matched their social narrative rather than their actual assets. You wonder briefly who else in the room is wearing someone else's heirloom. Earrings are even trickier. Small, understated, symmetrical. They must catch the light without commanding it. Anything that swings too freely risks drawing the eye away from your face and, worse, toward your ears. There's a light joke here about how even your earlobes are under surveillance tonight, but you keep your expression calm. Historians still argue whether such scrutiny was as intense as later accounts suggest, but standing under these chandeliers, you feel seen in a way that makes the debate feel academic. You notice an older woman nearby, her jewelry unmistakably grander, diamonds flashing without apology. She's allowed this. She's earned it. That's the hierarchy made visible. Jewelry is a timeline. What you wear tonight sets expectations for what you will wear later. If you start too strong, there's nowhere to go. If you start too modest, you risk being overlooked. The dress is the foundation, but the jewels are punctuation, and a misplaced comma can change everything. There are rules about inheritance too. Wearing family jewelry can signal continuity and respect for lineage, but it can also backfire if the piece is too famous. A fringe anecdote survives about a debutante who wore an iconic family necklace, prompting whispers that she was trading on reputation rather than merit. Historians still argue whether that criticism was fair or merely jealous, but the story endures because it captures the unease around visible advantage. You're expected to benefit from your family without advertising it. You become aware of how still you must keep your head. Excessive movement makes jewelry clink, swing, sparkle too brightly. Sound is as dangerous as shine. A necklace that taps against skin is distracting. Earrings that brush hair suggest restlessness. You hold yourself steady, neck elongated, chin poised. There's something almost meditative about it if meditation involved constant self-surveillance. The absence of certain jewelry matters as much as its presence. No bracelets to jangle, no rings to imply engagement. Even watches were often discouraged, as timekeeping suggested impatience or modernity. A mainstream fact tucked into etiquette books advised young women to appear timeless, which is ironic, given how carefully their lives were being scheduled. You resist the urge to check an imaginary watch, reminding yourself that tonight, time moves differently. You catch a glimpse of a girl across the room wearing a slightly more elaborate necklace than yours. It's tasteful, but noticeable. You wonder how that choice will be read? Bold, confident, or misjudged? Historians still argue whether boldness was ever truly rewarded in debutante culture, or whether it only succeeded when backed by undeniable status. You file the thought away because comparison is inevitable, but dwelling on it won't help. As the evening deepens, the jewelry becomes part of you. Its weight familiar, almost comforting. It anchors you, gives your hands something not to do. You remember being told that the best jewelry disappears after a while, becoming part of the wearer rather than the outfit. Right now, that feels like success. You also realize how fragile this balance is. One wrong piece could have undone everything you've managed so far. A diamond too many, a pearl too large, a sparkle at the wrong moment. Jewelry has the unique ability to scream without making a sound. Tonight, yours whispers, and in this room, whispering is survival. Your head feels heavier than it should, and it takes a moment to realize why. It's not nerves exactly, it's architecture. Hair, feathers, pins, and the invisible weight of expectation are stacked carefully above your thoughts. Hair is never just hair at a debut. It's engineering. A mainstream historical fact is that debutantes were typically required to wear their hair up, signaling maturity and readiness to enter adult society. Loose hair suggested childhood, informality, or rebellion, none of which you're here to advertise. You're keenly aware of every pin holding your style in place. They press gently against your scalp, reminders to keep your movements controlled. Turn too quickly and something might loosen. Touch your head and you'll draw attention. A quirky tidbit tucked into letters from the era mentions girls counting the pins in their hair before events, believing an odd number brought misfortune. Superstition thrives wherever control is tight. You didn't count yours, and now you're trying not to think about it. The style itself is deliberately unremarkable. Smooth, symmetrical, designed to frame your face without competing with it. Curls, if present, are disciplined into submission. There's no room here for chaos. Feathers, if allowed at all, are placed with surgical precision. Too large and you look theatrical, too small and you look like you misunderstood the trend. Historians still argue whether the occasional use of feathers was fashion-driven or symbolic, but everyone agrees they were dangerous. A single misplaced plume could turn elegance into costume. You feel the pull of your hair as you hold your posture. This, too, is part of the system. Hair that hurts slightly discourages slouching, beauty as posture correction. There's a light joke here about how your hairstyle doubles as a behavioral alarm system, but you don't smile. Smiling too widely can disturb the arrangement. Everything is interconnected in ways that feel almost conspiratorial. You notice how the hairstyles vary just enough to establish hierarchy. More elaborate styles suggest wealth, time, access to skilled hands. Simpler ones suggest restraint, or perhaps lack. A fringe detail from fashion historians notes that some debutantes travelled with personal hairdressers during the season, an extravagance that didn't go unnoticed. Historians still argue whether such displays helped or hurt a girl's reputation, but excess is always risky. Tonight your hair sits safely in the middle ground. There's also the matter of hats, or rather, the absence of them. Indoors, hats are removed, another unspoken rule that feels obvious until someone forgets. Hair must carry the visual weight alone. This is why balance matters so much. The style must harmonize with the dress, the jewelry, the gloves. One discordant note and the whole composition falters. As you move through the room, you're conscious of how hair draws the eye upward toward your face, where expression becomes critical. A severe style demands softness in demeanor. A softer style demands restraint. You calibrate instinctively, adjusting your gaze, your smile, your stillness. There's something almost athletic about it, like maintaining balance on a narrow beam while pretending you're just standing there. You overhear a whisper about someone else's hair, a comment so quiet it's barely sound. Too much? That's all. 2 words, devastating. You don't look to see who it's about. You don't need to. You understand how quickly judgment forms, how little evidence it requires. Historians still argue whether women were harsher critics than men in these settings, but the effect is the same. Surveillance from all sides. The hairstyle also carries the future in it. Once your hair is worn up like this, there's no going back without comment. It marks a transition. Childhood styles become inappropriate. Simplicity becomes suspect. You are expected to evolve, but only along approved lines. Tonight's arrangement sets the template. As the evening wears on, your scalp begins to ache slightly, a dull, persistent reminder of effort. You welcome it, in a strange way. Pain, however mild, confirms that you're doing this correctly. There's a quiet satisfaction in enduring something difficult without showing it. That, too, is part of the lesson. By the time you pause again near the edge of the room, you know your hair has done its job. It has framed you, elevated you, constrained you. It has kept you alert. It has kept you careful. And as long as every pin stays where it belongs, you remain intact. One slip, one fallen feather, and the illusion cracks. Tonight, at least, your architecture holds. Your feet begin to register their quiet protest now, because the shoes were never meant to be forgotten, only endured. They look delicate, almost ornamental, peeking out just enough beneath the hem to remind everyone that you are standing, not floating. A mainstream historical fact is that debutante shoes were often made of satin or thin leather, dyed to match the gown, prioritizing appearance over comfort in a way that feels almost aggressively symbolic. These shoes are not for walking away, they are for staying. You feel the narrowness first, the way your toes are gently but firmly encouraged into a single opinion about where they should go. Heels are modest, never towering, because height here is about posture, not dominance. Too high would suggest vanity. Too low would suggest practicality, which is oddly worse. A quirky tidbit from personal diaries mentions girls breaking in their shoes by wearing them around the house with thick stockings, then switching to bare feet on the night itself, a last gamble for comfort that rarely paid off. You suspect you are standing in the same long tradition of optimism. The shoes dictate how long you can stand still, which is almost ironic given how much stillness is required of you. Shift too often and you look restless. Shift too little and your feet burn. This is the balance, controlled discomfort. Historians still argue whether such physical constraints were intentionally designed to enforce obedience or simply inherited from fashion trends, but standing here, counting breaths instead of steps, you feel trained. The shoes teach patience in a language your body understands. When you walk, the shoes change your rhythm. Shorter steps, softer landings. You can't stomp even if you wanted to. The floor itself becomes part of the performance, polished and reflective, catching glimpses of satin and shadow. A misplaced step would echo loudly in this quiet room, not in sound but in attention. There's a light joke in your mind about how these shoes are clearly designed by someone who hated feet, but your face remains calm, serene, approved. You notice how shoes rank people too. Older women wear sturdier heels, more elaborate designs, confidence reinforced by comfort earned over years. Younger girls wear simpler styles, fragile and pristine. This hierarchy is visible from the floor up. A fringe detail sometimes mentioned by historians is that hostesses could identify newcomers by their shoes alone, spotting the stiffness of unworn soles, the cautious steps of someone still negotiating pain. Whether that's true or not, you feel conspicuous with every careful movement. The danger isn't just discomfort, it's failure, a stumble, a misstep, a visible wince. Shoes betray you at the worst moments. You remember being told to practice dancing in them, to learn how much pivot they allow, how far you can turn without sliding. A mainstream fact often overlooked is that many debutante dances were deliberately slow and formal, partly to reduce the risk of mishaps in restrictive clothing. Tonight, even the music is on your side. You sit briefly when allowed, careful to angle your feet just so. Ankles together. Toes pointed slightly outward. Shoes fully visible now, evaluated again. Scuffed soles would suggest prior use, which suggests thrift, which invites speculation. Your shoes are immaculate for now. You're relieved, absurdly relieved, that no one has stepped on your foot yet. Small victories count. As the evening stretches on, the ache deepens into something steady and manageable. You begin to ignore it, or rather, you fold it into the experience. Endurance becomes part of your presentation. There's something quietly powerful about standing gracefully while uncomfortable, even if that power is borrowed and conditional. Historians still argue whether such endurance was celebrated or simply expected, but expectation alone is enough to shape behavior. When you finally shift your weight again, just slightly, you do it with intention. The shoes respond predictably. They haven't failed you. You haven't failed them. In this room, that feels like success. You realize that long after the dress is stored and the gloves are folded away, your body will remember these shoes, the way they taught you to stand, the way they taught you to wait. And for tonight, waiting without complaint is exactly what you're here to do. Your eyes begin to notice color more acutely now, because color is no longer just aesthetic, it's permission. The room may look like a sea of white at first glance, but beneath the chandeliers, subtle hues emerge, and you understand that not all colors are created equal. A mainstream historical fact is that certain colors were traditionally reserved for married women, older women, or specific seasons, leaving debutantes with a narrow palette that signaled youth and restraint. Color, here, is a ranking system you wear on your body. Your own dress remains safely pale, but you see variations around you. Soft blush undertones, the faintest hint of blue-white, creams that lean almost gold under warm light. Each choice has been weighed against tradition and expectation. Too much color would suggest impatience, a desire to move too quickly into roles not yet granted. Too little, paradoxically, could suggest severity or mourning. A quirky tidbit from Etiquette Guides notes that wearing pure white outside of certain months was once considered ill-timed, a seasonal faux pas that could prompt whispers of ignorance. You're grateful someone else handled that calendar for you. Color also carries regional meaning. What reads as refined in one city may look dull or bold in another. Historians still argue whether these regional variations truly mattered or whether they were exaggerated by social climbers eager to police boundaries. Standing here, you suspect both. You imagine how this same dress would be judged differently in another room, another country, another decade. Context is everything, and you are dressed for this context alone. You notice the older women again, their colors deeper, richer, navy, emerald, burgundy. These are power colors earned through marriage, age, or status. They ground the room, providing contrast that makes your white seem even more deliberate. There's a light joke in your mind about how this is the original color-coded organizational chart, but again, not out loud. You absorb the lessons silently. Color comes later. Tonight is about restraint. There are forbidden colors too, though no one ever hands you a list. Red is dangerous, associated with passion, confidence, and attention. Black suggests mourning or defiance, unless softened by age and rank. Even silver can be risky, too reflective, too close to bridal spectacle. A fringe anecdote survives about a debutante who wore a gown with silver threading, sparking debate over whether it crossed into wedding territory. Historians still argue whether that interpretation was fair, but the damage was done regardless. Interpretation, not intent, rules here. You become aware of how lighting transforms color. Chandeliers warm everything, making pale shades glow and darker ones recede. This is intentional. The room is designed to flatter tradition. Your dress benefits from it, reflecting light upward, illuminating your face, reinforcing the idea of freshness and promise. There's something almost theatrical about it, like the lighting designer is on society's side. As the evening continues, you hear comments drift by. Lovely shade. So appropriate. These are compliments, but they're also verdicts. Appropriate is the highest praise you can receive tonight. Not beautiful, not striking, appropriate. Historians still argue whether this emphasis on appropriateness stifled individuality or simply delayed it, but the word carries weight. It means you've understood the rules. You think briefly about what would happen if you hadn't, if you'd chosen a color that pushed too hard, challenged too openly. Maybe nothing dramatic would have occurred. Maybe people would have smiled and moved on, but memory is sticky and color is easy to remember. The girl in the red dress, the one in black. Labels form quickly. You are grateful again for invisibility. As you stand there, absorbing the palette of the room, you realize color isn't about expression here. It's about timing. It's about knowing when you're allowed to be vivid. Tonight, you are not. Tonight you are pale on purpose, blending into a tradition older than anyone present. And as long as you stay within your assigned spectrum, the room remains calm, the hierarchy intact, and your place within it, for now, secure. You sense the mistakes before you see them because they ripple through the room like a change in temperature. No one points, no one announces. Errors at a debut are rarely dramatic. They're absorbed quietly, filed away, and recalled later with astonishing clarity. A mainstream historical fact is that debutante seasons were built on repetition. Multiple balls, dinners, presentations, meaning a single misstep could echo across events, gaining weight with each retelling. Tonight's dress code is unforgiving because memory is cumulative. You watch a girl across the room commit what appears to be a minor error. Her glove slips, exposing a wrist longer than etiquette allows. She corrects it instantly. The moment passes. And yet you notice the glance exchanged between two older women, the subtle nod that says, "Did you see?" This is how reputations fracture, not shatter, fracture. Historians still argue whether such moments truly altered social trajectories or whether later failures were simply attributed to them, but cause and excuse blur easily here. Some mistakes are louder, jewelry too bold, a neckline misjudged, a hem that refuses to behave. These become stories, not cruel stories usually, amused ones. Oh, she wore that. A quirky tidbit from letters and memoirs reveals that women could recall debut gowns decades later with startling detail, forgetting names but remembering fabric and fit. Clothing, it seems, outlives conversation. You feel a chill at the thought of being remembered for the wrong reason. Then there are the invisible mistakes, the ones you only learn about afterward. Wearing the right dress to the wrong event, repeating a gown too soon, failing to adjust your style as the season progresses. A fringe anecdote survives about a debutante who wore her presentation gown again at a smaller gathering, believing it economical. The Whisper Network decided it was gauche. Historians still argue whether this judgment was widespread or localized, but the moral was clear. Timing matters as much as taste. You become hyper-aware of your own choices, replaying them in your mind like a checklist. Dress, appropriate. Gloves, secure. Jewelry, restrained. Shoes, intact. Hair, holding. This constant self-audit is exhausting, but it's also protective. There's a light joke in your head about how this feels like a live performance review with no feedback, but again, you keep it internal. Feedback arrives later, if at all. Mistakes aren't always about excess. Sometimes absence is the problem, not enough adornment, not enough polish. Looking unfinished suggests neglect, or worse, indifference. A mainstream fact worth noting is that debutantes were expected to appear fully prepared, often with professional help, because effort itself signaled respect for the occasion. Looking natural was acceptable only if it clearly required work. The paradox deepens. You hear faintly a story being retold nearby. Someone's cousin, someone's friend. A dress that was a bit much. The tone is light, but the memory is sharp. You understand now how cautionary tales are formed. They don't need villains, they just need examples. Historians still argue whether this storytelling functioned as social regulation or communal bonding, but either way, it keeps everyone in line. As the night wears on, you realize that survival isn't about perfection, it's about avoiding distinction. The safest debutante is the one who generates no anecdotes. You aim for forgettable excellence, a strange goal, but a powerful one. The dress helps with this. Its simplicity absorbs attention, deflects commentary. You catch your reflection again, and for a moment you see, not yourself, but a composite of rules and expectations. That's when it hits you. The dress code doesn't ruin debutantes by punishing mistakes. It ruins them by making mistakes unforgettable. The fear of that permanence shapes every choice, every movement. When you finally exhale, really exhale, it's only because nothing catastrophic has happened yet. You know that tomorrow, or next week, or next event, the scrutiny will begin again. The margin for error never widens. It only shifts. Tonight, though, you've navigated the minefield successfully. No one will tell you that. You'll just be invited back. You begin to feel it now, the faint itch beneath all that perfection, the urge to do something, anything that belongs to you alone. It arrives quietly, tucked between compliments and careful silences. Rebellion, in this room, does not look like shouting or refusal. It looks like a seam angled just slightly differently, a texture chosen with intent, a choice so subtle it can be denied if questioned. A mainstream historical fact is that as debutante culture matured into the 20th century, small deviations in cut and tailoring became one of the few acceptable ways to express individuality without overtly breaking rules. You realize that even tonight, obedience has not been absolute. Your dress follows the code, but it also carries a decision. The fabric was chosen not only because it was correct, but because it felt right against your skin. The neckline is proper, but it frames your face in a way that favors you, not just tradition. This is how rebellion survives here, disguised as compliance. Historians still argue whether such choices constituted real agency or merely the illusion of it, but illusion can be powerful when it's all you're given. You notice it in others once you start looking. A girl whose gown features an unusual weave, visible only up close. Another whose gloves are cut a fraction shorter than expected, enough to modernize the look without attracting comment. A quirky tidbit from fashion historians suggests that certain seamstresses became famous not for breaking rules but for bending them invisibly, offering debutantes a sense of ownership stitched into approved silhouettes. You imagine the quiet satisfaction of that kind of work. These deviations are risky. Push too far, and the room notices. Don't push at all, and you disappear entirely. The balance is delicate. There's a light joke in your mind about how this is rebellion on hard mode, but again, you keep it internal. Your face remains calm, agreeable, exactly as expected. Inside, you're cataloguing the ways you've nudged the boundaries without tearing them. The rules themselves are starting to show cracks. You hear older women murmuring about how things are changing, a phrase that always sounds hopeful and threatening at the same time. Hemlines shift by inches over years. Fabrics grow lighter. Hairstyles loosen ever so slightly. Historians still argue whether these changes came from young women pushing back or from society adjusting to broader cultural shifts, but standing here, you feel part of that slow drift, not a revolution, an erosion. You feel a strange pride in having navigated the system well enough to bend it. Survival has taught you its weaknesses. The dress code relies on consensus, on shared belief. Once enough people accept a variation as normal, it becomes rule. Tonight's small choices are tomorrow's tradition. That thought steadies you, gives you something to hold on to besides posture and silence. As the evening winds down, the room relaxes just a fraction. Smiles loosen. Movements grow less rigid. The dress remains immaculate, but the pressure eases. You've proven you can belong here. That grants you a little room to breathe. The rebellion fades, replaced by something quieter. Awareness. You understand the system now, not just as a cage, but as a language. You can speak it, you can occasionally edit it. You take one last look around the ballroom, noticing details you missed earlier. The way tradition softens at the edges, the way rules depend on everyone pretending they are immutable. You know better now. And as you prepare to leave, careful not to rush, careful not to linger. You carry with you the knowledge that even within the strictest dress code there is room, small, precise, hard-won, for choice. You step back from the center of the room almost without noticing, because the night is already beginning to turn itself into memory. This is how it ends, not with applause or announcement, but with quiet dispersal. Cloaks appear, gloves loosen, voices drop, and yet the dress remains doing its final, most lasting work. A mainstream historical fact is that many debutante gowns were carefully preserved after the event, wrapped in tissue, stored in trunks, sometimes passed down, sometimes forgotten. The fabric survives long after the girl has changed. You imagine your own dress years from now, folded away, its meaning no longer active but not entirely gone. Someone may lift it out one day, comment on the craftsmanship, the color, the style. They may say it looks small, they always do. The body that wore it will be harder to recall than the dress itself. Historians still argue whether clothing preserves identity or replaces it in memory, but standing here at the edge of departure, you suspect the dress wins more often than anyone admits. You hear fragments of conversation as people drift past. Very appropriate. Such poise. She'll do well. These are not compliments in the usual sense. They are forecasts. Tonight's dress code has functioned exactly as intended. It has allowed strangers to imagine your future. Marriageable, reliable, suitable, dangerous words, all of them wrapped in politeness. A quirky tidbit from social histories notes that some debutantes felt a strange grief after their presentation, a sense that something essential had been concluded rather than begun. You feel a flicker of that now. As you prepare to leave, you become aware of how the dress feels different. Lighter somehow. Or maybe you're simply no longer bracing against scrutiny with the same intensity. The rules are still there, but they've loosened their grip. You've passed through the narrowest gate. The dress has done its job. Whether you like that job is beside the point. It succeeded. You think back over the night in fragments, the gloves, the hem, the shoes, the hair, the colour, the silence. None of it felt dramatic in the moment, yet all of it mattered. That's the quiet cruelty of dress codes like this. They don't announce their power, they accumulate it. Historians still argue whether debutante culture truly shaped women's lives or merely reflected existing structures, but you know one thing for certain. It trained you to be watched. You catch your reflection one last time, no longer searching for flaws, just registering the image. This version of you will persist in stories told softly, inaccurately, confidently. You won't get to edit those stories. The dress will speak for you. It always has, long after the silk fades, long after the rules shift. The idea of you in this moment will remain oddly intact. And then finally, you leave. The night exhales, the ballroom empties, the chandeliers dim, the dress code loosens its hold, retreating into expectation and memory. You step into cooler air, shoulders relaxing at last, shoes finally allowed to hurt honestly. Whatever comes next, freedom, repetition, change, you know this. The dress did not ruin you, but it tried to define you. And whether you accept that definition, resist it, or quietly outgrow it will be the real story, written long after the fabric is put away. Now the pacing slows. Your breathing deepens. The images soften. Silk becomes shadow. Rules blur into background hum. You've walked carefully through a world built on inches and glances, and you're allowed to rest now. Let the ballroom fade, let the weight lift, let the night stretch long and quiet again. You don't have to stand perfectly anymore. Nothing is being measured. Nothing is being remembered quite so sharply. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let the echoes of chandeliers and whispered judgments drift away. The dress is folded. The night is over. You are safe to sleep.